Is democracy really on the ballot like Joe Biden claims? The whole world watching U.S. midterm elections, the first since Russia's invasion of Ukraine fueled soaring inflation, the first federal elections since Donald Trump supporters stormed the Capitol to try and block results the last time around. We'll be asking about the issues that have pollsters predicting a win for opposition Republicans and what to make of anticipated record turnout in some races, with the former president hinting he'll use the result as a springboard to formally announce his bid for re-election in 2024. We'll be asking about the consequences of what's been a no-holds-barred campaign, no limits on spending, and on vitriol. What does the election mean for democracy in America? What does it mean for the rest of the world? At a time of war in Europe, stepped-up tensions with China, and through it all, leaders from around the globe meeting in Egypt to try and agree with a common plan to address the planet's climate emergency. What does the rest of humanity make of those bitter divisions raging inside its biggest superpower? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at that bitter midterms battle. Joining us will be from Middletown, Pennsylvania, Dan Mallison, Assistant Professor of Public Policy at Penn State University's Harrisburg School of Public Affairs. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Randy Yallows is president of Republicans Overseas France. Good to see you.
Nice to see you too. Thank you.
Craig Capitas, contributing editor to The Daily Beast. How are you?
Okay, Francois.
And Cécile Coquet-Mokoko, professor of U.S. Cultural History at Versailles-Saint-Quentin University. It's in the suburbs of Paris. Welcome to the show. Yes. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Up for grabs, 1/3 of the U.S. Senate, all of the House of Representatives, and more than 3/4 of state governors. One of those battleground states to watch, Pennsylvania, where a Trump-backed TV celebrity, Dr. Mehmet Oz, is challenging Democratic Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman, who suffered a stroke on the campaign trail. Well, let's go to Pennsylvania. And Jessica Le Mazurier. Jessica, what's the latest on this midterms election day?
Well, I am here in Lancaster City, in Lancaster County, standing outside one of the 9,000 polling stations here in Pennsylvania. Where I am right now, it's largely a progressive area. There's been a steady stream of voters going in to make their choice here today. Some of them pumping a fist in the air, shouting Fetterman as they come out, others remaining tight-lipped. Right where I am, it seems there are more Democratic voters. That's often the case in urban centres in the United States and in particular here in Pennsylvania. But once you go out to the more rural areas of Lancaster County, voters tend to be much more Republican. The Christian nationalists are all, it would appear, going to be voting for the Republican candidates. And I did go out and speak to some of them at another polling station inside a church. And one of the volunteers there told me that if the Republican candidate, Dr. Oz, loses the race for the Senate, she will not believe the election results. She will believe that they were rigged.
She'll believe they're rigged. You're in Lancaster County, as you say. It's known for its Amish community, a Protestant sect which lives according to the frugal precepts of its 17th century forefathers. They don't usually vote, the Amish.
That's quite right. The Amish traditionally have not voted in elections. It goes against their teachings. They do not believe in what they call coercive power. But it seems that something is changing. Whilst I was out of the city centre here in a rural area, I was on a farm where I met Sam Fisher, a representative of the local Amish community, which is one of the oldest communities, Amish communities in Pennsylvania. There are tens of thousands of Amish people here. In the past, they didn't vote, but he said, no, they are mobilizing. And he said that he had met multiple times with Doug Mastriano, who's the Republican candidate for governor here. He's one of the most considered by critics, especially as one of the most far-right candidates running in these elections in America. And he said that along with Mastriano, they had mobilized Amish voters, that his community is very conservative and pro-life, and they feel that their ideas align with the Republicans, and that they have been signing up in droves for the Republican Party, and that Republican Party members will even be helping them travel to the polls, busing them to the polls in order to vote today.
Jessica Lemesoyer reporting live from Lancaster County. Dan Mallison, again, the whole world is watching the Keystone State. Your thoughts on how it's going and how this campaign has gone?
Sure. So how it's going in terms of the Senate race it's a toss-up at this point. Fetterman had a lead over the summer, and that lead has narrowed substantially. And now it seems that it could go either way. So talking about turnout, as you just had been in terms of Lancaster County, but also areas of Philadelphia and in Western PA, are going to be really important to determine who wins this race. How the race has gone, it's been an unusual race. You mentioned Fetterman's stroke that he had just days before winning the Democratic nomination, a nomination that he won in every county in Pennsylvania. It was an overwhelming win, but he did have the stroke. It affected his campaigning, and it's been an odd campaign as well because of Oz and the attacks by the Fetterman campaign of him being an outsider, being from New Jersey, not understanding Pennsylvania. It's been a very personal campaign in many ways.
Well, I'm just back from New York City, Dan, and the attack ads, you always see them whenever there's an election in the United States. Is it worse than usual?
I don't know that it's worse than usual. Pennsylvania, we're kind of used to getting a lot of money poured into this state for ads and seeing ads constantly in the last few weeks coming up to an election. So I guess here we're a bit used to it.
Craig Capitas, a few years back, when here in France we watched U.S. elections, there were states like Florida we would pay attention to. Now it's the likes of Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Craziness is everywhere. It's as simple as that. The Republicans got a very strong foothold in Pennsylvania. Trump has made a lot of noise in Pennsylvania. They nominated this guy, Dr. Oz, which is the correct pronunciation in Turkish. He took the American Oz, Wizard of. It's about, look, every state's a battleground state now. I don't know. I'm a journalist. I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. You know, to me, the only way to look at a politician is down. So, but my feeling is, and Randy, you know, representing the Republican Party is probably in a much better position to point this out. But I think the idea of there being certain battleground states is over and done with for all intents and purposes.
I think it's the question of where the numbers are very close. That's when they talk about battleground states. It's where we know where the lead is either high for one candidate or for the other. What's gone in disfavor for Mr. Fetterman is, I think, his position on crime a lot. There's been a lot of messaging in Pennsylvania recently done on crime, and he has a poor track record on crime because he's been decriminalizing a lot and also de-incarceration, decriminalizing is laying out all, and that's what that's the position Mr. Oz is having, is that he's let out violent offenders, murderers. There's decriminalization of violent crime, no criminalization of any drug offenses, and release of prisoners and violent criminals. So there are issues that he has to explain, and Pennsylvania has issues with crime. And that's why the Americans, and that's why many of the analysts in Pennsylvania have been saying that because of this crime messaging that's been done by the Republicans, there's a shift. And Fetterman hasn't, during the debate, didn't properly react to those messaging. And the same thing happened in New York regarding saying there was a mass delusion. And I think that was ignoring the issue of crime and how it's important to the many Americans, as the New York governor said the same thing during the last debate, is that it's a mass delusion of the American people. And I think it's wrong to do that. And I think that's why the Democrats are losing touch with the Americans. If they were to deal with the issues, explaining what were their policies, why they did it, and maybe explain why it's good or not good, rather than just trying to criticize it, that could have been a better way of dealing with the issue.
So a strong economy and being tougher on crime right now is a bigger concern than a functioning democracy.
A functioning democracy is a point of view, sir, because the way you're saying it, I believe today what we're seeing is that the Republicans have done and have 75 litigation cases on election integrity. And there's major issues happening. You're saying there's a danger to democracy. I will give an explanation. There's a major issue even in Georgia, because Georgia's also a state where there is a major issue regarding the races that are going forward. And I'll tell you, I believe that you all support Mrs. Alvenda King. She's an Afro-American activist, Democrat, very active. She's the niece of Martin Luther King. And she wrote an article just recently in the Atlanta Voice. She says, hold Abrams and Warnock accountable for their election lies, because everybody, and that was the issue, is that we're not getting clear messaging on what's happening about the electoral system. And this is happening from the Democrats themselves.
So you're suggesting that what Trump supporters did in storming the Capitol in 2020, that there was a conspiracy
You're trying to do a cause and effect, because attacking, it was a demonstration that went out of control. There is no, everybody calls it an insurrection, but no one's been condemned for that criminally. There's been issues regarding that, and it's a vocabulary that it's used regarding that, and we can talk about it again. And when Mr. Trump...
I mean, they stormed the Capitol and tried to violently enter the chamber while they were certifying an election.
They didn't have enough police and soldiers. 20,000 soldiers were requested by Mr. Trump 3 days before. Mrs. Pelosi knew that there'd be issues. The FBI issued issues. The local police issued issues. And it was a demonstration went out of control. And there was, afterwards, problems with that. So, again, there has been several thousand hours of video surveillance that was held confidential and wasn't disclosed to the public by the January 6th committee. If we had access to that, I'm sure we'll see, as we said, the doors were open. So you're saying it's a conspiracy? No, you're saying it's a conspiracy. You're trying to...
You just said that evidence is being withheld.
Sir, I don't like, again, you see it as a characterization of trying to use his opponents as a conspiracy theorist. It's wrong to say that, because we have a different view. I won't treat my opponents as extremists. I won't call them as radicals. I will say either to the left. I believe that they're using their political means to hold on to their powers. That is, they're doing legitimately what they can do, and that's the political game. You cannot consider your adversaries right away to call them conspiracy theorists, to call them extremists, radicals, and that's the problem. Let's tackle the issues. Rather than criticize the individual.
There is a tone throughout this campaign of they're hiding stuff from you that has been going on. And it's true that, as Randy was saying, the Republicans have hammered home the message about a rate of violent crime that's gone up since the COVID pandemic, particularly the murder rate in big cities. This is the homicide rate in the United States. If you look at it over the last couple of decades, campaigning in Ohio, Donald Trump accused the Democrats on Monday of being soft on crime. In particular, he singled out the current Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Nancy Pelosi said, please don't call them animals, they're human beings. I said, no, they're animals. Of course, I think she's an animal, too. You want to know that? They'll say, oh, what a horrible thing he said about Nancy. She impeached me twice for nothing.
Cécile Coquet-Moukoko, your reaction to the president accusing the former president accusing the Speaker of the House an animal?
I think it's part of the decrease in civility that we have witnessed in American public life and among elected officials, really since the beginning of the Obama presidency. Before then, you didn't have Congress members calling out sitting presidents as liars in Congress. And there has been an escalation of name-calling in American public life.
Because Trump's idea of strength is violence. He demands to be treated with humanity, but he dehumanizes everyone around him. This is the whole thing. That animal quote is right to it. You're looking at violence, irrationality, intolerance, racism. It goes right through it. And you know what? America has bought into it. The Republicans are likely going to win. It sells. It sells. The irrational is seductive in America.
I'd like to reply to that, sir. I think it's wrong to try to just purely criticize Trump. During the 2016 campaign,
but do you agree with calling the Speaker of the House of Representatives an animal?
She said
after her husband's been attacked.
That we all regret, and we wish him that he gets well very quickly, whether it's an attack. Mr. Cruz was attacked just 2 days ago also, and Mr. Fetterman was attacked with a knife attack. We do not forget. And we all, against whether it be Democrats and Republicans, we condemn those type of actions. But the question of the name-calling and the insults has gone on since the elections with Mr. Trump. Mrs. Clinton treated all the supporters of the Republican Party as deplorables in 2016. we were considered by Mr. Biden extremist and a threat to the republic. Mr. Obama considers us to be racist because we have strong immigration policies. Mrs. Hillary Clinton in a September conference treated the Republican Party and the MAGA supporters, what she called us, Nazis, and she called Mr. Trump a Hitler. So I would even say it's nice to call her an animal. If you consider her to be a Hitler, I think it's even being nice to say that when you're considered to be that. So I think the language is incorrect. I would stay away from that language. That's why I don't like to import.
Cécile Coquet-Mococo?
Yeah, the proponents of mask mandates were also called Nazis, and comparisons with Hitler have been very common as well. I think that's something that is recorded by analysts of political speech.
Dan Mallinson, why? I'll put the same question. You heard Cécile describe this violent rhetoric, calling it unprecedented. Why?
I mean, it's unprecedented in ways in American politics, right? I mean, you know, if you go back in American history, sort of partisan vitriol is not new. It goes back to the founding of the country. But the level of rhetoric has certainly heated up since the Obama administration, not the Obama administration particularly, but in the responses to the Obama administration and in the 2016 campaign. But I think you also have to admit that that much of this language has been legitimized by a sitting president speaking this way. I get that both sides have done and said things that are not civil, but Trump was considerably different from other presidents in the rhetoric and the language that he uses.
So there's this increase in violent rhetoric, and there's the fear of actual violence once the ballots are counted in places. Last week, a federal judge ordered armed members of a group monitoring ballot drop boxes in Arizona to stay at least 250 feet away from the locations. This after a lower court overruled complaints that people wearing masks and carrying guns were intimidating voters. And that's on top of accusations that the groundwork is being laid, again, to contest the results. Wasim Kone reports from Arizona.
It is your morning ritual with me, Garrett Lewis, KNST AM 790 Tucson.
Every morning, Tucson wakes up to Garrett Lewis on the radio.
Friday, baby!
For 4 hours, the conservative talk show host discusses politics. On today's show, the conversation centered around another report on alleged voter fraud in 2020.
And they found over 20,000 ballots that should have been tossed.
Democrats at all levels, even Joe Biden himself, have called people like Lewis election deniers, people who have challenged the results of that election.
Yes, I believe there was widespread fraud. There were officials, they were Democrats, that chose to change the way votes were counted, accepted, things like that. If you put your ballot in the mail, it goes through 12 different sets of hands. Who knows what can happen?
And this is what election skeptics want to end, the ability to send your ballot in by mail or to vote early like here, sometimes weeks before Election Day. They say it allows and even encourages electoral fraud.
It's a system that Mark Finchem wants to overhaul. If he becomes the next Secretary of State, he'll be in charge of overseeing the next presidential election in Arizona. And he has said he would not have certified Biden's win 2 years ago.
We're not denying that there was an election. We're just questioning the result. So for all of the people who say, well, it's going to take us a month to count all those ballots. Really? How is it that France can count 64 million ballots, I believe that's their number, in a day?
But this is the real Republican star here. Carrie Lake is running for governor. She's a former news anchor and entered politics just last year.
And so I like to do this for the fake news. How many of you aren't watching the fake news anymore? We had that border, it was a mess for most of the time. Politicians promised they would do something, and nobody did until President Donald J. Trump came along.
Republican supporters reject the term election denier.
We have a lot of questions that have not been answered. Answer those questions for us.
All eyes will be on this building in Phoenix. It's where 2/3 of Arizona's votes will be counted. Final results may not come for several days, but despite the doubts and questions some may have, officials are asking voters to trust the process.
So, Cécile Coquet-Mococo, your thoughts on who gets to vote, when this idea of absentee ballots being ruled out, what's it all about?
I think there have been efforts to facilitate the voting process of rank and file American voters across the states, and that especially since people vote on a Tuesday and not a Sunday, unlike France, it is absolutely crucial for voters to be mobilized and to be able to cast their ballot. So it is really of the highest importance that people should be able to have early voting. President Trump himself used early voting. So it's really bizarre for international audiences to see Americans questioning processes that facilitate the voting process.
Dan Mallinson, what's it all about? And can you, because I know Pennsylvania is one of those states where in 2020 they were counting those ballots for days. You heard that candidate for Secretary of State in Arizona say, how come it can't be like France? Well, here in France, of course, we have an interior ministry and it's all centralized. But will Pennsylvania be any quicker this time?
It will not, likely. So, you know, the decentralized nature of our elections is very important to understand. The federal government does not run elections. The states do. And more so in states like Pennsylvania, our counties do. And so that means there's 50 different ways of 50 different sets of rules for things like mail-in balloting, ballot drop boxes, early voting, etc. One of the things that's particular to Pennsylvania is we have, since 2019, have no excuse absentee balloting, meaning that anybody can send in an absentee ballot if they would like or request one and vote by mail. But what Pennsylvania does not allow is county election officials to do any processing of those ballots before Election Day. And what other states will do is they give county election officials time before the election to open the ballots, verify the signatures, and do those activities so that on Election Day they can simply count the votes. But that none of that pre-processing work begins until Election Day in Pennsylvania. So it is very hard to have an accurate count in Pennsylvania on Election Day with the amount of mail-in balloting that we have had in the 2020 election and now we're expecting in the 2022 election. But that delay is not any malfeasance on the part of the state. It is simply the mechanics of processing ballots and counting those ballots and then performing the audit work that's required by law on the back end.
Is it about suppressing the vote, as Democrats claim?
Is what about suppressing
the fact that some want to curtail, for instance, absentee balloting?
So this is where there's sort of the rhetoric of balloting and voting rules and the kind of political reality, right? So the political reality is always that as you change these various rules, they do tend to benefit one party over the other, right? I mean, both parties use the rhetoric of either election integrity or election access in arguing for these different rules. But it's also true numerically that parties benefit from either the increase in access and ease of voting or the decrease in access and ease of voting. And so it gets very murky very fast. There's sort of the rhetorical arguments, and then there's the numerical reality, which we've seen play out here in the debates in Pennsylvania.
Randy Yellows, tell us, you live in France, tell us you've gone native and that you'd like to see one set of rules for the whole country.
No. No, because again, if you nationalize the elections, you'll have either one party could go for or the other. That's what we consider is that they'll monopolize the election system. And one way, if they have the majority either in Congress, they could put rules that favor one party or the other. And this is what enables the parties to be able to avoid that type of situation, because once you put rules in place, it's that majority that will have the advantage and won't allow the other party to take on have the different advantages. But what's interesting, and I talk about the electoral integrity issues, is the ID laws. And you're asking about France, which all the French take for granted here is that we must present ID for voting here in France if we vote, where nearly 20 states, for the most part, all are Democrat. And again, there is a major risk for fraud in the elections when you don't have presentation. I have my own nephew that could not even vote because someone voted in his place because they didn't present ID. You have to buy cigarettes, you present your ID. You buy alcohol, you present your ID, and everybody has ID because everybody either can go buy it. So today it's not a reason to say that you'll deprive one American or another from voting. It's a question of, do we want integrity in the system? Voter ID laws are the basic guarantee for ensuring integrity.
All right. Cécile Coquet-Mokoko, what's interesting listening to Randy is this distrust of the federal government overseeing it. Here in France, we're always complaining about our government, but nobody contests the results of elections.
Yes, but I'd like to say something about what actually a valid ID is for Americans. Because for French people, we have this national centralized system of identity cards. But I remember that during the elections of 2012, if I'm correct, there were states that implemented laws whereby you could show ID from your shooting range, but you could not show ID and be considered as a valid voter if you showed a student ID card. Or you had laws in place that said that you had to be a resident of that state for at least 3 years to be able to cast your ballot. So it's not as easy as it could seem at first sight. Mm-hmm. And also, people who have done the work of tabulating the votes and looking really at the reality of voter fraud in detail have found fewer than 0.3% of actual fraud over the past elections.
All right, let's take a look, if we will, just for a second at another tight Senate race. It's in Nevada, and there the issues you could say are different. Hotel and restaurant workers in places like Las Vegas struggling to make ends meet as inflation bites. Eric Pape is there for France 24. Eric, we've heard our panelists talk about how crime has become a big issue on the campaign trail. Where you are, it's about the price of filling your tank.
Well, you know, I was actually here about 6 months ago, and I filled my tank for $6.75 a gallon. Might sound affordable in France. That is outlandishly expensive in the United States at some of the highest gas prices in the state. Now I'm seeing prices that are $2 less, about 33% less. The prices have come down a great deal. It still takes a bite, and people's finances are still in dire straits in many cases, in part because of the pandemic, in part because of its effect on tourism. There's been a lot of up and down in the economy, and that has had this sort of whipping sheet effect that has undermined the livelihoods and the sort of economic stability of quite a few people. So it's a big topic. There are also issues people have been bringing up around homelessness, around the cost of living, the cost of bacon even, but also a wide array of other issues. And then there are these higher level issues that are coming up, like abortion, which is legal in Nevada until for the first 24 weeks of a pregnancy. And then other issues like protecting democracy. I was just speaking with a woman outside of this voting center, this elementary school here in Las Vegas, who was saying that she wasn't worried about the election. And then I said, well, you know, why did you vote for who you voted for? And she said, well, it's because I'm worried about democracy. So she seemed serene, but her underlying concerns were actually the big ones. She noted all of the smaller problems and the palpable things, and even discussed a bit how the things that people are voting for, the senators don't affect crime directly in any way. Senators don't affect inflation in a direct sort of way. Mayors do affect crime. Police chiefs affect crime with their policies and what they do. So there's this strange malaise, we could say, this discomfort, and there's an anger among a lot of people, but in some cases it's getting spread in different directions. It's certainly something that usually hurts incumbents when there's an angry flow like that.
And it's a tight Senate race that you're covering there, Eric. Again, the Senate, where now it's a deadlock in terms of number of seats. And we've seen pollsters saying that more and more there's this rift between college-educated white people who tend to vote more and more Democratic, non-college educated white people who tend to vote more and more Republican, and minorities in the past who generally were associated with the Democratic Party. However, Eric, we're wondering about what the Latino community, which is big where you are, is going to do. It's not following that pattern necessarily.
Yeah, there have been signs that this may be not breaking down, but this effect overall might be weakening in a number of states. Certainly here, people who are concerned and want change, if they're concerned about crime and if they're concerned about inflation and not seeing their needs met, they're going to be tempted to move towards other parties unless they're more concerned about other issues like abortion. But as I mentioned, abortion may not be a game changer in Nevada the way it might be in other places where the local situation could be imminently affected. But the idea of protecting democracy and election deniers, which you've been talking about in Arizona, applies very much here, and that seems to be a driving force. But I would consider that one of the high-level discussion things versus the lower-level, more palpable issues that are coming up. Right. But I think many Latinos are wrestling with these questions of who they're going to vote for and why, and it appears from polling that their numbers may be shifting. But then again, the polling has been it's been all over the place on what Latinos in Nevada might do. So I would take it with a grain of salt, and I think we're going to have to wait until the end of the day today, and well, actually until the ballots are counted to know how much of a shift there really was.
How much of a shift there really was. Eric Pape, many thanks for that update live from Las Vegas. That worry about democracy is something that has been mentioned a lot. Last Sunday, Congressman Jim Clyburn defended his drawing of parallels between what's happening inside the Republican Party to the rise of Nazi Germany. He was called out about it on Fox News. The South Carolina Democrat doubling down.
Election deniers setting up procedures by which little committees by governors can overturn the results of election. To call the press the enemy of the people, to co-opt evangelicals. And I grew up in a Christian faith, in a parsonage, born and raised in a parsonage. I know a whole lot about religion. And I know there's always an attempt to co-opt religions, and that is what's going on here. And people want to deny it, that's fine. But the facts are very clear. I've studied history all of my life. I taught history. And I'm telling you, what I see here are parallels to what the history was in this world back in the 1930s,
so, Congressman,
in Germany, in Italy.
Randy Yellows, again, here in France, people, they think back to January 6th, and a lot of them may wonder if he's right, the congressman from South Carolina.
I think, again, you're playing on the fears, and I think that January 6th has been overplayed. Again, you have to look at the way the media has treated the question. I think it's important to know that January 6th was a demonstration that went out of control, and it was insufficient police, insufficient security. Doors were opened, and of course we criticized anybody.
And the President of the United States stayed silent throughout the riot.
He stayed silent. He asked Americans to stay back afterwards.
3 hours later.
He stayed the declaration afterwards, okay? He was overwhelmed also by the situation. And in any case, I think you're always trying to put this on the Republicans. I think there's also a question of who is in power to make decisions regarding security. Inadequate security, even the person responsible for security retired and was replaced at that time at the Capitol at that moment because they lacked the questions of security. You're talking about, again, the issue of trying to demonize the Republicans again, considering us as extremists. And again, another one of the Democrats calling all the Republicans, again, the Nazis. Again, as I said,
he didn't say all the Nazis in the interview. He said election deniers. That's
election deniers,
which are not all the Republican Party.
Look, let me explain to you. Election deniers. If I look at Mrs. King, what she was saying is she's saying that Mrs. Abrams and Mr. Warnick are election deniers because she said they should be held accountable for election lies. So it depends who and from you're listening to. And I think it's very, very dangerous to make those accusations and use those adjectives. It's to create fear again, the voters. And I think it's not the right type of language. If you want to deal with the issues, talk about the issues. Let's go to the issues instead of trying to use adjectives which are just there to insult and violent rhetoric to discredit one or the other.
Again, Craig Kapitas, this is the first federal elections taking place since January 6, 2020.
291 of the 569 GOP candidates, federal, state, they're all election deniers. Now, Randy is correct about the adjectives. I agree with him. And I agree with him that Donald Trump and the maggots are not Nazis. But fascism comes in many shapes, forms, colors, and smells. And what America is faced with right now, Francois, is the fact that the country is founded on a document. It's a work in progress. Each generation tests it. And I think once these votes are counted, America will have failed the test.
How?
There will be a civil war of sorts, not like the one in the mid-19th century, but there are enough guns, there is enough hate on both sides, on both sides. We've already seen this. There are enough monomaniacs, incompetents, and ideologues on both sides of the fence. It's out of control. What happened to Pelosi, what's happened to some of the Republicans, it's all shameful. It's all shameful. And if you track it all back, it all goes to one person, this sausage roll Donald Trump. It goes back to him. This is not the party of William Scranton, Liz Cheney, Dick Cheney, Ronald Reagan. This is a party that has managed to capture the airways, managed to capture the hearts and minds of people who think that once the Republicans win tomorrow, gas prices are going to be $2 a gallon. That's what they believe. Now, they're going to win. And I wish the Republicans luck in shutting down what they have clearly started, because this is what's going to happen.
Dan Mallinson, is that your reading?
You know, I want to remain sort of the political scientist in the conversation.
He's right. He's right.
Politics, but yeah, I mean, you know,
all right. I'll put it to you differently, Dan. You heard what Randy says. It's a demonstration that went out of control. Seen from here in France, from a lot of people, it looks like there was an attempted coup, and the party that supports the man who acquiesced, if he didn't actively lead it, is going to be back in power on Wednesday.
Well, the man himself will not be back in power. I mean, exactly. He'll be running for power again by all indications, and that will be another process to play out over the next 2 years. But, you know, political scientists are highly concerned about the fragile state of American democracy. And this is something that we've been talking about for a while, been researching for a while. Concerns about the electoral system and the accusations that are made about fraud and deceit in the electoral system have certainly undermined Americans' confidence in the election system. Political violence is on the rise, as we've seen with the Pelosi attack and the attack on the Capitol. Also an attack here in Pennsylvania. We had a member running for the House, for the state Senate, I believe it was, that was attacked outside of his house. And these things, unfortunately, we expect will only continue and potentially continue to increase as long as the rhetoric remains as heated as it does, and as long as particularly the Republican Party is not willing to accept the outcome of elections and the integrity of the electoral system. So yes, there is a lot of concern among political scientists who study our institutions and study democracy about the fragile state of American democracy.
Cécile Coquet-Mococo, when you take a look at what's happening in America. Is this just an American ailment? After all, we had the murder of a member of the British Parliament in the lead up to the vote on Brexit. What is it about these times where the violent rhetoric spills over into actual violence?
I would not draw the parallel with Nazi Germany. I would look at home, if I were American, and I would look at the decades that led up to the Civil War, unfortunately. Let's remember that in 1828, you had someone who was the vice president who developed and articulated anonymously at first, but it became known that he was the author of the theory of nullification. Namely that an individual state could nullify federal law if it considered it antagonistic with its vital interests. So if you have people, I mean, it's not novel that you have people really high in power that can endanger American democracy and the understanding of the checks and balances process and the federal system. I would look at it as an American phenomenon, and as Craig said, whether or not you love the Constitution of the United States as the Founding Fathers, imperfect as they may have been, thought of this experiment really is up to the choice of American voters. And on both sides, you see this rhetoric of saving America, saving America's soul, or saving America, which is becoming Trump's next slogan. And it is really cause for concern, because we know how it can escalate, especially with the circulation of firearms across the country.
The COP27 is happening right now. Right, it's a sign of, we have globalization. We have whether we like it or not, we have to come up with solutions where the whole planet comes together on some of these important problems. We have war in Europe right now, and we've seen the EU trying to pool its resources in coming up with a solution, going transnational, basically. Here you heard Cécile mention the states' rights. The idea, is there part of your party that believes that the answer to globalization is to give more power to individual states rather than a federal government in dealing, again, with these global challenges?
That was the whole. We had the Articles of Confederation initially that didn't work, and then we had our Constitution. Why does our Constitution work? Is that we give certain powers to the federal government and we give certain powers to the state government. And we've decided, based on the Constitution, that the electoral process would be a state-regulated matter rather than a federal regulated, because there was a question of trust in the federal government. And today we have issues of we're going to federalize or not, because again, there were certain aspects of the Constitution that remained silent on certain issues. And if they weren't treated by the Constitution, they were granted to the states. Here we have it, is that today we have a system where there is a balance, because you have the federal government, which has its role, and you have the states that have their role. And I believe by having several different states, there ensures that there will be a free democracy and a balance. Because today, what happens if you seize the power? You have the government today, the Democrats have weaponized the Department of Justice and the FBI. And everybody in Trump's administration has either have issues with the justice system. Everybody has issues. And also the January 11th committee have had issues with the justice system. In addition, you should know is that there were also between the Justice Department during the election process, we should know that the GAFA, big tech, and we have Google today, has been playing a role in trying to censor the Republicans. The Republicans filed a suit against Google because they suppressed millions and millions of emails regarding that were being sent out to voters. So again, if we don't ensure that political interests are not centralized in Washington by lobbyists, we have the states to ensure the protections of individual rights. And as long as we have states doing so, there will be a balance of power.
Craig Kapitas, more power in the hands of states rather than in the federal government?
Randy did well in his constitutional law course. That was very good litigation, sir. On states' rights.
I mean, we're seeing it especially with issues like abortion.
Well, yeah, but I mean, how do you micro-encapsulate this to send the show off? I don't know. More often than not, in my experience, is covering this stuff, both the goofballs on the left and the goofballs on the right, and there's certainly enough of them to go around. The most intolerant, narrow-minded people are the ones who congratulate themselves on their tolerance and open-mindedness. And I see more of that coming from the Trumpian Republican side than I do from the Democratic side. Joe Biden would not stand up and call Nancy Pelosi an animal. Neither would have Barry Goldwater. Neither would have William Scranton. Neither would have Everett Dirksen. And I'm mentioning names that very few people in our audience have probably ever heard of, but these were lions of the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln. And I believe, or at least claim to believe, that Trump has managed to get a lot of people who want cheap gas and are worried about their lives as they should be, and sold them a bill of goods. Because at the end of the day, America has always loved a con man, has always loved a hustler. You're the historian. You could probably even cite more names.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but we're going to have much more coverage, including live coverage of those results with our teams throughout the United States, coast to coast. I want to thank Craig Kapitas, Randy Yalas, Cécile Coquet-Mokoko, and Dan Mallinson for being with us from Middletown, Pennsylvania. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.